Hello, good afternoon, good morning. Hope everyone's doing well. Maybe I think we have some people also where it's good evening. So anyway, thank you so much and welcome to December's webinar. This is Sarah Kirkmeyer from Insights Now. I'm here with Greg Stuckey and we'll introduce ourselves in just a minute. We're super excited to have you as part of our webinar series, and this is the one for December. We have more rolling through next year, and we're excited to get started. Today, we're going to share with you a perspective on consumer research, really to focus and to strengthen your approaches through greater utilization of CATA. Now, I found that as I've kind of done some pre-work about CATA, is that a lot of people call it check all that apply. It's known by a lot of other names as well. It's known as select all or check grid or multi-select. And I think it's all of these types of questions that we're thinking about, or questionnaire styles that we're thinking about, where we really want to leverage the power of them. How can we utilize them in a better, more effective, more efficient way? And that really forms the foundation of what we're going to be talking about today. We utilize these types of questions throughout the research process, from screening to marketing communication to brand attributes, product testing, even descriptive panels. And the idea here is just to balance obtaining all that information from respondents in a way that's going to maximize our ability to gain insights. Probably a long introduction, but hopefully you'll kind of see all these pieces as we talk, as we go through this entire webinar. As I mentioned, we have two speakers today. I'm Sarah Kirkmeyer, and I'll have Greg Stuckey introduce himself in just a minute. I've spent the last 20 years in CPG and ingredient suppliers focusing on sensory and consumer research. A few years ago, I joined Insights Now and excited to work together with clients to design research to drive their business forward. Really, in doing so, I've had a really great opportunity to continue with my passion for innovation and new ways of thinking. And this has included behavioral consumer research, which is really a key foundation of Insights Now. And Greg, I'll have you introduce yourself, please.
Thanks, Sarah. I'm Greg Stuckey. I'm the Chief Research Officer here at Insights Now, and I have the joy of being able to do a lot of behavioral research here, and as well doing a lot of training on behavioral research. So one of the things that we're always excited about is to try and take things that are fairly complex, such as behavior and the challenge of changing behavior, and give simple tools, techniques, tips, and tricks that can be used every day in research to make your research more and more behavioral, more likely to predict what people will actually do as you're trying to build out new innovations.
Great. Thanks, Greg. We'll hear from Greg in just a little bit. But as a bit of housekeeping before we start. If you have any questions, please enter them in the side tab and either direct the questions to us confidentially or to the entire audience. We'd love to have discussion questions at the end of our webinar today. Also, if you're experiencing any technical difficulties, let us know. We'll do the best that we can to get you all set up and so that you can enjoy this webinar together with us. All right, as we get started, for those of you who are unfamiliar with Insights Now, we're founded in 2003 and are a behavioral market research company. Our approach is to look at the way people behave and why they make the decisions that they do, starting with empathy and really focusing on on understanding, and take all this and help us really propagate and move things forward. We're excited that Insights Now has been recognized as one of the most innovative firms in the world. And we're excited to kind of share this with you and, take this learnings and kind of have the opportunity to discuss these through this webinar. Now we're going to get started. I put on this slide just some different check all that apply questions that I pulled from some recent questionnaires. These are pretty rough in form because they're from the program survey, but it's really to bring to light the different ways of which we might be using these types of questions. The first one, is related to screening. Which types of food allergens do you have? And then you might have more than one. You might, be allergic to eggs as well as soybeans. Those are types of things that you have multiple responses to. Then also, if we're in a product evaluation situation, how would you describe the texture of the meat in the sample? It might be tender, it might be tough, it might be dry, it might be spongy, it might be none of these. And so these are questions that you can answer multiple at a time. We've just gone through multiple different attributes, and just checking yes or no, you just check yes, leave unanswered for no. And then the last one here is about motivation of this product. If you're thinking about it as a face cream or some other type of beauty product, what's your motivation in that moment to purchase the product? Really take a moment to think about that. I might just be purchasing off the shelf, but sometimes we ask you to think about that motivation and respond back to us. And it could be multidimensional. You could have lots of different things. It could be because it's on sale, but also because it could be good for my family, or it's in the right type of packaging, or it's environmental or supports a social cause. All of these things might just not be one answer, there might be multiple. And it's a great way to leverage and utilize Check All That Apply. So what are some of the advantages of Check All That Apply? These are the 3 key focuses of this webinar. As we really constantly struggle to capture the information we want from consumers, we only have a limited ability and time and their attention to keep them fully engaged throughout the questionnaire. And we're thinking about simplified approaches, better, more efficient approaches, more behavioral approaches that we can really think about, maybe fewer scales and more specific, in this opportunity, looking at more CATA questions. In comparison to scaled questions, CATA, Check All That Apply, those types of questions that I talked about, are simple to execute and generate fewer sources of error. In this webinar, we're going to focus on these 3 advantages. The first is what I just mentioned, shorter questionnaires, which will enhance participant engagement. This isn't to say that CATA totally replaces other questions. Think about just about right or intensity scales, other types of questions. It's really about maximizing the impact and focusing on efforts. The second is thinking about these types of questions through different modes of thinking. System 1, 2, and 3, implicit, explicit, prospective. It's a really different way, and it's been a real opportunity for me at Insights Now to think about my experience with Check All That Apply in kind of a new light. And I'll be excited to share this with you and go in deep with each of these a little bit later in the webinar. And finally, analyzing Check All That Apply and realizing the flexibility and opportunities in this analysis just really gives us ways to make actionable information and insights out of it. Because oftentimes in the past, when I've used these types of questions, sometimes it just looks like a mess on a screen. It's hard to interpret some of this information. So we've worked hard to try to figure out how to streamline that and use some of our examples and experiences to leverage them and share with you. All right, so let's jump right in. When we think about it, we ask a whole series of questions. And what happens is people take less time considering their response to each question. So this happens due in part to the fatigue they start to feel as they answer questions. So if we look at this one, it's amazing to really think at, okay, we have different questions and the amount of time that it really takes to answer each question. So if you have fewer questions, you're going to take more time. You have more questions, you're going to go through it a lot quicker. And where's that right balance? That's what we're really trying to achieve through developing a questionnaire and a ballot, types of ways that we engage with consumers. So when we're thinking about shortening our questionnaire and trying to optimize and find that right balance between the length of time that consumers are taking, as well as getting the information that we need, one way is Check All That Apply. I mentioned before this example of texture with meat. I think it's interesting to think about this just as an example. We have lots of different ways that we use Check All That Apply, and really thinking about this one just as something that we're going to carry through this webinar as an opportunity just to go back to it for several different things. When we think about Check All That Apply, we can think about how it's utilized in consumer research. We're going to really think about this textural example, but I take a pause because I think about, well, let's think about CATA. Think about the features of a mobile phone, or think about additional attributes of a descriptive panel, or think about brand-related attributes. Try to, project those into this type of example as you go through this if you aren't specifically working in product-related attributes. It's just a way for us to kind of make a great illustration of all the different types of opportunities that we're seeing. So to talk about this example, in this CATA, we have 16 attributes plus a none of the above. If we can imagine in a CLT, the consumer has just tasted a product and thinking about the texture of the meat. We likely have asked other questions around liking, jars, open ends, things like that. But the CATA really adds a layer to learn about a variety of different types of attributes. We might not do a whole question on grizzle, for example, but it's interesting to see if that's a negative attribute that's going to come out. Negative and positive attributes are really good to use in a check all that apply because we can kind of see both of those opportunities. And one of the other points that we're going to see is that we might have some unexpected attributes that we could include. I use the word unexpected because sometimes there are attributes that are very well related to the product that we might think they are, and sometimes consumers surprise us a little bit and say, nah, that word doesn't really relate, or it's not that important to me. And check all that apply is a good way to kind of understand and see that balance. Now let's compare to just about right and intensity questions, other ways that we could get at that same type of information that I showed on the previous slide. Oftentimes in product testing, we ask about a specific attribute. In this way, using just about right in the middle and anchors on each side with too tender or much too tough, too tender, somewhat too tender, just about right, somewhat too tough, and much too tough. You could have other just about rights that go from not at all juicy enough to much too juicy with just about right in the middle. As you can see, I've taken these 16 attributes and we're actually going to have 14 scaled responses because you'll see from the CATA, we use some positive and negatives. We use tender and tough, as well as soft and firm. So both of those are specifically included. It's good to include those different types of polls as long as they aren't saying not enough, not at all, for example, not at all fatty enough. It's really interesting to kind of look at this slide, but just about right. Now we're going to add some more because we haven't covered them all. We haven't covered thickness or mushiness or dryness or quality of the meat. We haven't covered the intensity questions either that we're going to be showing here on this slide. Intensity questions aren't jarred, they're just attributes that work better as intensity questions. So for example, not at all rubbery to extremely rubbery, or we talked about that grizzle attribute before. Really interesting to kind of look at all of these and to say, if I add up all the little circles on the last 3 slides, just for the jars and the intensity, we have 17 possible answers. So your brain's working a little bit harder because you're considering, okay, where am I going to evaluate each of these on the 5 different options versus just a yes, no for CATA. I'm not here to say that CATA should replace all of these different attributes because if there's ones that are really important, just about right or other types of intensity attributes or other types of scaled questions are really relevant. They're important to do. But if we can complement it and reduce the amount of other types of questions and really harness the power within CATA, we have the opportunity to kind of reduce fatigue and increase our focus of our questionnaire. So here we get to our first tips and tricks slide. You'll see multiple of these in this webinar to provide you ways to leverage these insights in your work. The tips and tricks for CATA questionnaire include the first one, focusing on a few scaled attributes, and then expand your ability to capture attribute information through CATA with complementary attributes or others of interest. Because then you can really expand. You can put some of those words in that might be of interest, and we'll see if consumers really find them relevant, or if they're small in variation but have a high impact. So very interesting to kind of look at these and expand our ways of which we can engage directly with consumers. Second, we want to focus on attributes meaningful to them. So we have the ability to add more attributes for consumer assessments, but we need to make sure they make sense. For example, we want to avoid jargon. There's a lot of industry words, and someone said, well, we've got to write it at 5th grade level. There's a balance there. We need to be able to provide words, and consumers oftentimes have a hard time coming up with a lot of these terms. So it's a great opportunity for us to kind of get responses to the ways of which we might be talking about a product. For example, we're talking about brands or talking about product-related attributes. Really understanding, okay, what are these consumers associating this type of attribute with this product? Both positive and negative words can be used. We talked about the soft and firm, and then we also should make sure we exclude attributes that are not. So if we include juicy, we don't really need not juicy. And finally, we want to leverage other research like qualitative and social media to really come up with these words. And then we can pre-test them if possible. So again, really keeping them as consumer relevant as we can. And in the end, we want to make sure that none of the above is at the end. We want to lock that in position at the end, just to give consumers an outlet when they're responding to this type of question. So hopefully that gives you some initial insights into CATA. We're going to go a little bit deeper and turn our attention now to thinking about the types of questions with regard to CATA and how consumers are engaging with them. Because we're talking now about different modes of thinking. And system 1 is thinking about implicit reactions. System 2, more explicit, and system 3, prospective. In my experiences with CATA, most often we're trying to get quick responses. So we're a lot of thinking about the implicit response that we might be getting. And on the next slides, I'm going to go into these in more detail about how we can think about moving them also from implicit and when the opportunity is for explicit or prospective types of CATA types of questions. All right, so as we move to this next slide, really system 1 thinking is an automatic, fast, and unconscious way of thinking. It's autonomous and inefficient, requiring little energy or attention, but is prone to bias and systematic errors. Research tapping into system 1 thinking really gives fast responses and often is considered a consumer's emotional responses to choices. For CATA, as I mentioned, we think about product cues and other responses related to product optimization, even including emotions in system 1. The textural example that we talked about firm and grizzle and things like that, is mainly system 1. However, I caveat when we're going to talk about system 2, it might push into system 2 a little bit as well due to its length. So these fast, quick, autonomic responses are really related to system 1, and CATA fits extremely well there. And the tips and tricks when thinking about CATA for system 1 is one thing that you might kind of think about in a different way is making sure you prime consumers in the category. When we're thinking about priming, we want to get consumers or respondents to feel immersed so they can respond quickly into a system 1 implicit way. If you feel much more immersed in that experience, in that behavior, in the understanding, then you've got a greater likelihood to respond more relevant to the actual experience that you're consuming the product or putting the lotion on your face or answering that mobile phone. At Insights Now, we also often prime consumers by asking them to tell us a story of the last time they engaged with that product category experience. Other ways are to do homework or other tasks even before they start the evaluation. Again, the goal is to get them to think and be more actively engaged in the context of the study. And this is especially important in emotional cues, but you'll see in my tips and tricks, priming is going to come up again as well across a lot of different things. So thus, priming is pretty important to us from a behavioral standpoint to make sure that we're getting consumers really thinking about and engaging in their understanding of this product and this category so that we can get the best results possible. When creating CATA lists for system 1, more shorter lists are appropriate. We want to keep that quick system 1 response. And one way to achieve this is to separate out appearance, flavor, and texture attributes. The example before was just texture attributes, but it was pretty long. One great thing about CATA is that we can also include more consumer attributes like refreshing or bold, which can also often be considered integrated attributes. So you kind of put those things together so that consumers might respond to them as opposed to putting them within the texture or the flavor, unless they fit. It's really your judgment. And finally, from a logistical standpoint, trying to keep consumers in system 1, one of the suggestions would be keeping opposites next to each other. Keep that soft and firm close to each other so that consumers have that ability and moving through that quick mental process of checking and not checking, saying yes or no, that this specific attribute applies. Great. All right. We're going to move forward now, talk about System 2. This is, in System 2, there's more thought about how products could fit within existing routines, what alternative products are considered, and even who should purchase or use the product. It's a much more focused, slow, conscious decisions used for complex decision making. For CATA, we move away from just specific product attributes, like we talked about before, to more about the consideration set, who might be using the product and the trade-offs for that. For example, who would replace, would this replace my current or would this be good for my family? So tips and tricks for System 2 is, give instructions because CATA for System 2 needs to look and feel a little bit different. These instructions give consumers permission to think about the options and move into System 2 thinking. It's still good to have them primed as long as the consideration set can be captured in, as their consideration set can be captured in System 2. And logistically, CATA for System 2 can be longer. So going back to that texture example, we could really shorten it and focus it for System 1, moving into some of these more complex, integrated, other types of terms, even adding in, moves us into a System 2 thinking. And we have that kind of balance between the two. And in System 2, it is okay for the list to be longer because you're giving consumers, the respondents, the permission to think about the list and the answers to the responses. It's much more explicit. And last, as we think about System 3, we move into more prospective thinking. This one was a little tough for me. It's like, okay, so how does this work? But you can think about it in how does it work in current routines, which is a more navigational type of prospective thinking, or imagining new routines when using a product, or how that might make you feel. We can think about recalling happening in one's life, in your life, and see how it fits in these past experiences, or imagining new ones. So for CATA, we can think about things as similar to past experiences or projecting to social. So for example, think about a social situation and in utilization of a product. CATA terms like makes me feel included or would be difficult to eat. I think about appetizers and how they could be really difficult to eat at this time of the year when we're in a social setting. I can project myself into that right now. I can really see myself with a very easy to eat type of appetizer or something that's a little harder than I need a couple bites with and a napkin, and I'm very worried about that. So I think it's interesting to kind of see how that prospective thinking can actually be included in these types of evaluations. So tips and tricks for System 3. I talk about priming again. Priming is especially important to give them time to think about the future and time to answer the questions. So sit in the present, but be able to project yourself into the future. And instead of thinking about positive and negatives like a product attributes, we think about hopes and hesitancies. Hope that this product will help me do blank, or concern that it will be messy in a social situation. And finally, in System 3, it's okay to use longer descriptions and different types of attributes together. As we kind of pull this all together, we're going to move forward and have more discussion about tips and tricks and the ways that we might analyze check all that apply. And I turn it over to Greg.
All right, excellent. So if you're a student of literature at all, you'll know that check all that apply and publications are quite prevalent in the field of marketing research and psychology research, et cetera, so forth. A lot has been published on them. A lot has compared them to various techniques. A lot of very, very advanced modeling approaches using check all that apply, as well as other types of data combined. What we want to cover today are some fairly simple analyses and some very, very simple tips and tricks to help you uncover basic patterns within check all that apply data. Because I think one of the things we often overlook as we think about analyses is we often get really excited about the really cool modeling we can do, when in fact some really, really simple techniques can help us get to the pattern of the data and the right answers very, very quickly. All right, so the first thing we're going to take a look at is a simple line graph. So if you remember the 16 attributes that we had as a check all that apply a question right at the beginning, if I take and have 5 products in my study and have those all 5 of those rated on that check all that apply question, one simple way to display this information is to show those attributes in the order they show up essentially on your questionnaire, even though they're probably randomized for the consumers. But show them in that order, because maybe the way you order them has some sort of a meaning to you. So maybe you're putting a certain type of attribute on the left and a certain type of attribute on the right, and that will help you see some patterns. However, this generally tends to be extremely messy way to look at it, and for me, there's no rhyme or reason necessarily to the particular ordering of it. Then it becomes very difficult to understand. I would actually prefer not to have this. I would prefer to have just a bar graph instead. However, line graphs do have a lot of value. A lot has to do with how you sort the attributes across the end. So a simple way to resort these is just from highest average to lowest average. And what's interesting when you do this is the direction of the lines now becomes valuable to you. So if a product follows the average, all the lines start high on the left and go down to the right. So if you're looking at this graph, any line that goes up means that it is bucking the trend. It is different for some reason for that particular product on that particular attribute. So in this particular case, you can see if you look at the orange line, when you go from chewy to juicy, there's a big jump. So the chewy, orange is the lowest in chewy, but the highest in juicy. And it's really quick to see that pattern because that's a line that jumps up very quick for you. And this approach I particularly like. It's one of my favorite because it's really quick to see where things spike out and where things are different. The other thing that's really valuable about this is that I can concentrate my time on the things on the left-hand side, because those are the things that people are talking about. Things on the right-hand side, all the products are very, very low in those particular attributes, and they're not going to be necessarily very useful in terms of finding unique trends. All right, unless something's really unique out there. The next way is to order it from left to right by standard deviation. What this does, you could also do it by p-value as an example, but what you're looking for is to put all the things on the left that are where there's bigger differences between products, and on the right, the things where there's fewer differences between products. So now I have a rank order of attributes from the vantage point of what helps me differentiate the 5 products in this particular study. So I know that juicy is the biggest differentiator of the products. Dry, which is the opposite there, is the second biggest differentiator. Now, a final way, a fourth way, is to do something that we haven't talked about yet, which is ask people about their ideal product. So in a lot of product studies, we just ask about the products that are in the research. We don't ask about necessarily where an ideal product would be. This is especially valuable if all the products are all prototypes within a study, and you're trying to identify maybe what space to move forward in a very quick and simple study. By comparing this to the ideal and you sort it based on just one product. Now, if one of the products in this is your control product, work the same way, right? You can sort it so that the control product goes high to low, and you can compare all the other products against the control. It would be the same scenario. So line scales, nice, quick, easy way to look at patterns. Now, the same information that's in the line scale, if you don't like line scales, can be displayed in a correspondence analysis. Essentially, it visualizes the exact same data in a way that, for those that are more spatially oriented, allows you to find specific patterns. So this, again, is the goal on this is now to see less about the attributes and more about how the attributes and products are more similar or more differentiated from each other. One challenge about the correspondence analysis, you got to keep in mind that the values for the attributes are very relative. So the difference between 1% of the people picking something and 10% of the people picking something is pretty large, 9%, right? But if you're going from 57% to 62%, that really high percentage, that the ratio of percentage difference is much smaller than the ratio of percentage difference on 1 to 9%. So a lot of times what you'll see is these less important attributes, ones that are checked off a lot less times, will fly to the outside like mushy and spongy do here. And you might accidentally conclude that those are more important because they're farther out. In correspondence analysis, not necessarily true. So definitely don't take correspondence analysis at its face value without looking at the raw percentages, or include some type of a cutoff. Unless some product gets at least 10%, don't include it in the analysis. Now, the other cool thing about correspondence analysis is that you can add other types of scaled attributes to this if you convert those scales to, say, a top 2 box or a top 3 box. So let's say we had asked overall liking in this study. We might look at the percent top 3 box overall liking score on each of the products, and then that will show up just as if it's another attribute in this particular grid. And you can then see where does overall liking fall. It's a very simple technique, not very robust in many senses, but something that's pretty quick. All right, now, a couple tips and tricks, just to reiterate what we just went through. Reordering or comparing to an average or an ideal or a control product is great. Simple visualizations with correspondence analysis and adding in either cluster analysis or some other very simple techniques for looking at patterns. And then remembering to convert scale data to category data by like taking top 2 box, top 3 box scores and being able to overlay that on the grid as well. Really simple way to see some patterns very quickly. All right, now we do want to talk about overall liking and other types of benefits that you're trying to build products around, and how Check-All-It-Apply compares to jar scales. A lot of jar scales are used. You take the end, the too much and too little, and if it's over 20%, you include it in analysis. It says, how much does that impact my liking score? It's a wonderful way to look at penalties against your key attribute or key benefit of the product. CATA can do you can do the same analysis with Check-All-It-Apply as well, but you can also look at the reward side, not just the penalty side of it. So we call this, from our wonderful senior statistician, we call this paper out because we wanted to, if you are interested in literature, you can go out and read how this analysis is done. Very simple. A lot of people can follow that technique by reading the paper. What you get from a Check-All-It-Apply, and I call it risk reward, just to differentiate it from penalty from a jar, especially if you're doing both in one study. What we're looking at here is the percentage of people across the bottom axis there that checked that attribute, and the difference for those people who checked it in their overall liking score from the people who didn't check it. And when you look at this, you can see that attributes in the top half are actually being rewarded. So products that are higher in juicy, higher in tender, higher in moist are getting rewarded. This product that's when it's got stringy, dry, rubbery type attributes, when those are being noticed by people, it's getting penalized. So the overall liking is being penalized. And you can see across the middle, those things in green are not significant. Those are closer to 0 in overall liking change. The things in red are significant. So you can both look at the pattern as well as see which things are actually having a significant impact on your key attribute like overall liking. The great thing about this particular approach is that it allows you to take a look at attributes that may be very beneficial when you're really early on. So it's pretty common when you're early on with early stage prototypes for the prototypes to get pretty low liking scores. They're not ready for the market yet. They may just be barely out of benchtop work. And so they may need a lot of help still. And one of the things that jar scales will help you do is see where the most extreme penalties are when those products are really not that good yet. Whereas check all that apply, one of its great values when you're in that situation is that it will tell you where the rewards are. So yeah, the product's not very good, but here's some key attributes that if you can enhance will make it better, versus penalty, which just tells you which ones you need to take away or fix. Now, the other thing we like to do with the risk and reward data is we like to weight the data based on the percentage of people, because one of the things that you see in that scatter plot is that the penalties that are listed on the left-hand side of, like 2 full scale points in overall liking, it's not like you're going to be able to fix that attribute and suddenly improve the product by 2 liking points, 2 points on a 9-point liking scale. So what we like to do is weight it against the percentage of people in the study, and that gives us a more reasonable look at what overall liking change might actually look like. And this helps us rank order better the attributes to focus on, because we know how much of a change, if we fix that attribute in that particular product, we might get, or on the reward side, how much benefit we might gain by improving that product and making it even more, in this case, moist, tender, and juicy. All right. So a couple of tips and tricks for the penalty and risk reward analyses. CATA penalty does allow us to understand the effect on liking or any other benefit, just like you have with just about right scales. I will say that in practice, if your products are all amazingly liked, right? So they have where like jar scales, there's no penalties at all. Check all that apply is fabulous, because it does help you find those little nuances where there could still be small improvements, where you still have a little bit of risk with a product. Likewise, when products are really not very good at all, CATA allows you to see where there's rewards better than the jar. Where jar comes in to be even better is when you are in that place where the products aren't very good yet. Then you'll see a much better analysis of the penalties when you have products that are pretty poor. All right. Good. So those are our tips and tricks for data analysis.
Thanks, Greg. As we wrap up, we hope you can take away key points about utilizing this type of multi-select question, check all that apply as you design your questionnaires and your research. CATA provides an accurate measure of these product cues and can shorten questionnaires. It really allows us to think about things from a system 1, 2, and 3 perspective. We often think about CATA just from system 1, and there's a lot of value when we move to explicit and prospective thinking with CATA. The analysis of check all that apply through organizing our data, looking at risk reward, really gives us the opportunity to interpret these results in a meaningful way. And finally, the CATA provides insights to trade-offs between benefits and hedonics. That's very valuable for product design and development. We hope this information illuminated your day, like the like the holiday lights my daughter was enjoying. And with that, we wanted to say thank you so much for participating with us on this webinar. I think my other daughter is super excited as well. Please go ahead and enter your questions in the chat box window. We'll see if there's any questions. Just pause for a moment. If there's any questions you want to type in, we'll answer those, and then we'll wrap up here in just a minute.
You bet. Well, we've got several questions already. So if anybody else has other questions, go ahead and type them in. We'll kick off with the first one, Sarah. And the first question is, what about an other option for the check all that apply? When is that appropriate? So we have none of the above in there, but when is an other, like other please specify option appropriate?
I think that that's an interesting perspective, because we feel like CATA sometimes can be closed-ended, because we're providing that list and we want them to reply to the list. But there are opportunities to put other especially when you're having some shorter types of lists, or if there are things that you really want and feel like consumers can provide details on. The challenge is, of course, with other, it's hard to analyze that data sometimes because you have less consistency across consumers. But there could be opportunities to put other. Greg, any other additional thoughts from your
Yeah,
side?
I would say like we've seen the most benefit from other uh, in two cases. Number one is where you have a when we're doing perspective thinking and you're asking
Mhm.
people to think about the future, and you've got your own kind of worldview of where you think this product would apply to them in the future. And if you, but you might not have thought of everything. So having that other please specify, especially in those situations, could give you possibilities that you might want to follow up on with in future research.
Yep.
The other place I've seen it become very valuable is when you're asking people about things in the moment. Like let's say you're in home with a study and you're having them really quickly check off those types of things that are why they made a choice or what's motivating them in this very moment. And those lists often, when you're in the moment, there may be something very specific that's patterning you, and to be able to write that in another, what if you are doing that at scale, i.e. not just 100 people, but maybe you're capturing several thousand different moments in life, then you may very well find a really big group of other statements that are motivating people that you just didn't know was a motivator. So it can uncover a new area.
All
Okay,
right, great.
another couple more.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, the next one is how do you prime a consumer in a CLT setting?
And Greg, I'm going to pass that back to you since,
Yes,
yes, since you're the behavioral expert, I've
no
learned a lot
problem.
from you.
Yep, no problem. So from a CLT setting, Sarah mentioned probably our favorite way to prime people, which is at the beginning of the study, you have them tell a story. And this is their own personal story about use of that particular product, or if you're showing a concept to set them up to say, hey, today we're going to be focusing on this particular new product idea. Now, have them tell a story. When was the last time you used a product similar to this? What types of situations could you see yourself using a product like this in? And allows them to tell that story. If you're doing like work with a group of brand users, you might have them tell a story about when was the last time they used that brand, who was in that particular moment, what did they do, what was it like, what did they like about the product, stuff like that. You really don't care per se what the answers are, and you really don't need to analyze those stories in any particular fashion. That's not their purpose. Their purpose is to get them out of this white-walled mindset and into thinking about when this product is being used in their life. Then when the prototypes come out, that story, those moments in life that are meaningful are top of mind, and that priming is going to influence the way they score the products. There's other ways to do it. You could have them do more extensive priming, like you could give them homework to do when you recruit them prior to coming in the CLT. But our favorite is the storytelling, and we use that pretty much every single piece of research we do. Okay, another question. PCA analysis on the frequency data. Have we used PCA? Yeah, we use lots of different types of analyses. PCA can certainly be done with this type of information. I think it depends on what you're looking for, trying to visualize. I would say that correspondence analysis is if all you're doing is just looking at the percentage data by itself, correspondence analysis is, probably more readily available and easier to use than PCA for many people. But there are a lot of different visualization techniques based on how you structure your data and how you transform that information. Another one, we've got actually quite a few questions. So another question, any software that we know that generates the penalty analysis for CATA and JARS? Personally, I'm not aware of any yet, but we don't, like, I don't, they mentioned Sims, CompuSense. I don't use Sims or CompuSense. I'm not sure if anybody else has experience with that. Say yes or no, and I can let people know, unless you have any experience with that. No? Okay. And then the last question here so far is, can we share the title and author of the journal article that was shown for the risk reward analysis? Yeah, you want to flip back to that screen so we can just have it up real quick. And I think that I just want to make sure if it's not. Oh, yep. So this is Dave Plain, and this is in food quality and preference, and the title is CATA penalty reward. So we pulled this image from the top of that article on the website. So you can go and take a look at this. You are welcome also to email us if you want a specific reference to it, and we can send you there. But hopefully you can kind of read it up there, food quality and preference. I think it's number 24 from 2012. Yeah.
I got cut off just a little bit on that slide.
Just a little bit.
Just a little bit.
All right. Let's see.
Thanks everyone for your questions.
We have.
That is fabulous. We really appreciate your interactivity and kind of asking us these types of things and kind of getting the discussion going. As we wrap up, we want to let you know that our next webinar, focusing on learning, is all about focusing on learning from all of you. It's so fun. We captured some amazing insights from the 2018 Corporate Researchers Conference, and we're going to share that in January. It's going to be here before we know it, unfortunately, Thursday, January 10th at 2 p.m. So hopefully you'll be able to join us for that, for When Researchers Play. And finally, we wanted to take this opportunity to wish you, your family, your work family, all of our colleagues, happy holidays and the best wishes for 2019. Really appreciate you joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next year. Or this year if you still have projects going on. The year is not over yet.
Nice. All right, thank you, everyone.
Have a wonderful day.